Okay, so this is one topic of research that has been in the works um, for quite a few years. Um, Give me just a second, and I'll share. Okay, there we are. So, um, this is an article related to a 2015 SIGGRAPH paper. So this is a special interest group related to graphics. That's SIGGRAPH. Um, and in this paper, a method of sort of artificially making the environment, like the physical boundary of your VR play space, feel larger, is discussed. So this is something that I've really wished I could have, like when playing adventure games, like Half-Life Alyx, for example, where you have a VR game where there's a lot of free movement, but that free movement always feels kind of curtailed by the fact that your play space is only so large. Like it's probably one room, it's only so many feet by so many feet, and you're gonna, see that grid popping up on your VR display a lot of the time, telling you, "Hey, you've reached the edge of your play space." It, to me, it can be really not frustrating nor a hassle, but just like a little bit of a constant little splinter
You
in
can
the
say
experience.
annoying. Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel the
Well,
same
I mean,
way.
it's not quite that, but like it would be really nice to be able to move around more freely,
Hmm.
especially because the solution that a lot of adventure games pose to the problem of exploring a larger environment when your room is smaller than that environment is like doing a point and click to teleport to a spot on the floor, um, which feels really, to me, really like jerky, um, where all of a sudden, you just instantly like teleport, um, or having you do like continuous movement with a joystick, which feels a little bit more natural. But if you're not sitting down, for me, makes me lose my balance, and also, regardless of whether I'm sitting down or standing up, can cause a lot of motion sickness. Um, I don't consider myself a person who gets motion sickness when playing games, but that solution causes motion sickness for me, and I can only play in like 30 to 45-minute increments. So what this paper does is it tries to solve that problem. So this is old, but the reason that I'm showing it is that new developments are continuing to be built on this, and hopefully we'll see things enter like the actual like everyday VR um like play soon, where we have technologies like this. That's my hope. So here's what this does. This is called redirected walking. And what it does is, let me quickly find a spot in this video. I know the sound won't play, and that's okay. Um, but I'm gonna see if I can get a good um, graphic that shows this. So what this does um, is, here's a good example. So here's a person who's walking through a virtual space that's larger than the room that they're in. And we can see as they're moving around, um, there's a there's a map here of how the world um, is overlaid on the room. So the smaller room is in green, but the world at large is in is in like sand color and the tops of buildings and so on. And what's happening is that as the person moves around, the spatial relationship between the physical room and the virtual environment changes. There's shifting and there's rotation. And the way that this works is it's supposed to subtly guide the player or the user away from the boundaries of their physical space. And it does this very gradually. It tries to do it as subtly as possible so that you, the user, don't notice that you're kind of being corralled away from your walls, so that you still get to have the feeling um, of moving around through a larger space. So, from moment to moment, these adjustments are usually quite small. Um, but in order to keep them subtle enough, you still need to have a pretty large space in order to use this method. So, in order to have an experience of being able to walk infinitely through like an arbitrarily large space, with this technique that was developed in 2015, you needed to have a space that was 6 meters by 6 meters, which is pretty significant, like roughly 20 by 20 feet. Um, and I, for one, do not have any one room that is so large. Um, so, as time has gone on, there have been other improvements on this, and one that I really want to show, which is discussed in this paper, redirected walking in VR. And just to show a little summary of that paper, um, this tries to decrease the room size that's necessary by throwing in some additional tricks and keeping them subtle enough so that you don't notice that you're being redirected. But with these additional tricks, you can be corralled away from your walls more aggressively without you noticing. So that then the walls, your room can be smaller and this technique can still work. I'm not exactly sure what the limiting size is with this paper, um, but they use new techniques which can then have the effect of reducing the room size. And the techniques that they use are really sneaky. So this method largely uses eye tracking. Um, so any time that you have like a moment of like very brief blindness, the um the spatial relationship between the room and the virtual environment will change more aggressively. So there are two moments when we as people are perceptual, are like momentarily blind that happen very often. So one obviously is blinking, and then the other is literally any time we dart our eyes from looking at one thing to looking at another thing. That moment is called a saccade, and when it happens, our brain basically makes we can't really see during that blur of motion, and our brain edits our sense of time about that blur of motion and basically puts um what we see after the saccade into like replaces the blur of motion that we would have otherwise seen. This is why, like, if you glance at a clock, like an analog clock that's like ticking every second, sometimes as you first glance at the clock, it might seem that the second that hand lingers for longer than an actual second if you time it in a particular way. Um, so what this does is it um, allows for really significant warping of the room. So here's an example of a virtual layout, and it manages to get really, really compressed. Um, so this is taking advantage not only of momentary blindness, like with blinks and saccades, um, but also by having in mind what paths the user is most likely to want to follow ahead of time, and adjust and tweaking the way that the room is um, deformed with the knowledge of those paths, so that you've got the paths basically as scrunched up in the middle as possible. Um,
I see.
here's there's a nice diagram for saccades and what happens during them. Yes. Okay. So here's okay. These are the same. All right. So here's an image of um a user in like a old Wild West town. Maybe they're outside like a saloon. Um, and this is showing two frames that are either adjacent or very close to each other in the video feed that the user is getting. The left frame, we see two images, one for the user's left eye, one for their right eye. This is before their saccade. This is before they dart their eye from looking at, in this case, the top right corner of the saloon's like front, to kind of the bottom left corner of the door on the ground floor. Um, and we can see that in the single frame or like very few frames that the saccade takes, to get their eyes from looking at this to looking at that, the whole world is shifted by maybe 5 degrees or so. So all of a sudden, the saloon, whose top right corner was previously inside of this circle, has now shifted over here.
But you don't notice
Um,
it.
you don't notice it because you're blind during that. And so by tracking the user's eyes, all of a sudden you get a hold of all of these little moments where you can, move the world without the user knowing, as long as your movements are small enough. And fortunately, because blinks and saccades happen so often, like saccades multiple times a second, you're able to shift things way faster to help keep the user away from walls without them noticing. So my hope is that, as we continue to find techniques like this, where um, we're able to find more and more ways to adjust the spatial relationship between the real world and the virtual one without the user noticing, um, we will eventually get to a place where like we can have infinite exploration in like a room the size of a bedroom or a living room, or like some other room that is like a realistic expectation for room size.
I could have
And
used this
yeah.
when I was in. So I was in Rhode Island for an internship, and I
Uh-huh.
stayed in an apartment that was like 200 square feet, and like
Mm.
that's like the size of most people's kitchens.
Yeah, that's
And
that's really small.
yeah, and like I had a VR headset, and I couldn't play anything except Beat Saber. Just because the same reason, like you said, like it's
Right.
just I was just so constrained.
Right.
And if I had something like this, it would have been so much more useful. So do you? I guess like did they report any kind of motion sickness while they were conducting studies, or like were these relatively successful results like all throughout?
That's a really good question.
Hmm.
Um, I I don't think this paper discusses too much the user experience. Give me just a second.
Yeah.
Let me see if there's. So let's look at, because this paper doesn't even have a results section.
Oh, okay, okay.
Um, which is really disappointing. It basically just introduces these new techniques. I think it's doing it from a theoretical standpoint.
Hmm.
Um, rather than from a technical standpoint where they're going out and actually trying it, because you can see that they don't have a methods section
Hmm.
either.
But it makes sense.
um yeah, for this one, I wasn't able to find the original. Where's the Hold on, unless they have it. I don't know what the relationship with motion sickness is.
Hmm.
Intuitively, it seems to me like you can minimize motion sickness, or you can control for motion, or not control for, but you can regulate motion sickness by changing how aggressively you're deforming the environment.
Yeah,
If it even causes motion sickness,
yeah,
because for motion sickness to happen, you have to you have to be aware of a disconnect between how you're physically moving and how you appear to be moving.
gotcha.
And if you don't notice that, I don't think that motion sickness is possible.
Yeah,
Um, so happen, if these changes are successfully hidden from the user, um, then I think I think you would be able to avoid motion sickness. That being said, if you, there probably exists some kind of a band,
hmm,
however narrow, where below which you're not making very aggressive changes and the user isn't aware of them, and they
yeah,
feel totally like they feel as they would in any other VR experience.
yeah,
And then above which the user is consciously aware that things are moving and feels kind of like weirded out by it and
yeah,
confused.
hmm,
And there's probably, I bet there's like some amount of band in the middle where the user might like start to feel like something is off, but might not consciously like be aware that it's this
hmm,
redirected walking
hmm,
unless like you told them. And I wonder if in that situation they like where they just feel like something is off, they would cause motion sickness.
Yeah.
Because it's not like they would be consciously aware
Yeah.
um, that that movement is happening differently. But I could see there being a band like that. Unfortunately, I can only speculate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's a really cool question. And I imagine that you could avoid it by um, like reducing by how much you're like causing the user to go away from the walls. And I I seriously doubt that it would be any worse than like say the continuous movement of a joystick,
Hmm.
where you have like such an overt disconnect from you, the stationary player in your physical world, and then the your virtual self and your vision moving some direction at like 3 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think you would get anything more severe than that.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. So that's a fun one. Um, Another one is oh, I like this one. So this one is about so this is another paper about the experience of spending time with friends with a VR platform versus monitor mouse keyboard. So this paper goes into, or rather, the motivation behind this paper is exploring, how during the pandemic, social interaction, hanging out with friends, has shifted significantly toward virtual interaction, and how in certain situations you'll interact with like monitor, mouse, keyboard, the majority of the time. That's certainly what I do. But also there exist platforms for interaction that use VR, um, like VR chat or AltSpace VR or Rec Room. Um, and so this paper is exploring if there are any differences in how players or users experience social time with friends when they're virtual with a monitor, mouse, keyboard setup versus when it's virtual interaction in VR. And to summarize, um, first of all, this is a pilot study. It's 220 participants, so confirmation with a larger study is needed. Um, but if this, if this paper's findings can be confirmed by a larger study, then, well, those findings are that that when you socially interact in VR, as opposed to with monitor, mouse, keyboard, it tends to give greater feelings of relatedness and also just fun. Um, those are two of the three categories that this paper uses for like classifying the experience that you have. Um, One thing that this paper, or the third kind of dimension of social interaction, which this paper notices VR does not cause an improvement in, is what this paper calls self-expansion. The feeling of like growing as a person through interaction with your friends, or the feeling of being able to express yourself in a meaningful way, like through art, for example. Um, so the three platforms that they explored um, were in AltSpace VR, VR Chat, and Rec Room. And I was wondering, I don't personally have any experience with any like social VR platforms, these included. Have you ever used one of them?
Yeah, I've used VR chat before.
What is that like for you? Like, do you hang out with friends? Do you hang out with strangers?
Yeah, I mean it's a mix of both. Um, but I mean
Okay.
like it's definitely I would say it's I don't like for me like I think this might vary from person to person, but for me I'm very like I kind of like put an emphasis on the aesthetics, and I think that like for me like VR chat like you still get a good element of interaction with people, but it's just the
Yeah.
graphics are just really choppy. At least like, it's been a while. It's been a while since I've used VR
Mhm.
chat, but the graphic I just remember the graphics just being really choppy, and it really took away from the experience. But again, like
Mhm.
I was able to interact to a good degree as opposed to like going on AIM or like messaging someone like over text.
Yeah.
Definitely like more for me like a higher degree of interaction.
Mhm. Mhm. I've never used it before, but it's something that I've thought about.
Yeah.
Um, when you say that the choppiness of the graphics hurt the experience for you, are you talking about how it's, cartoony and doesn't try to be photorealistic, or are you talking about something other than that?
For me, it was I got motion sickness pretty early on.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean I think like everything was just like not just cartoony, but it was also like very pixelated.
Oh, got it.
And so yeah, again, it like took like the two combined like I probably lasted probably like 20-30 minutes before I started like oh like I gotta take these off.
I'm so sorry. Is it something that you like come back to on the regular, or was it kind of just that one time?
The motion sickness or VR chat in general.
VR chat in general.
I went a couple times. Probably it's again. It's been a while. Probably like almost a year.
Okay,
But I when I was going, I would go probably like once a week just to check things out.
that's cool. So you'd have like particular spaces, like particular rooms within VR chat that you'd go to, and like they'd have their own like sub communities. Is
Yeah,
that kind of how it works?
yeah. So you when you go in, you're teleported into like this like kind of like 3D graph, and then you go in, you pick your avatar, and then
Mm,
you warp into this kind of like lobby where
mm,
like there are other people there and you can interact with them, and then from there you can warp into different worlds.
gotcha. So one, so this paper. Also, thank you for explaining that, because like I've seen so many clips of VR chat
Hmm.
before, and it's been kind of this, I guess, passive thing that my brain has been doing of like trying to piece together, okay, exactly how does this
Yeah,
how does this platform work? How do
yeah,
you move around it? Thank you.
yeah, of course.
Um so let me see if I can get better definitions of these three things. Enjoyment, relatedness, and self-expansion. Um give me 1 second. Um uh This is something that might, dang, take a second. Um, what if, oh, one thing that I could do instead? I could show another, here it is. Here's definitions of the measures. Okay, we found it, everyone. So the, so of these measures, there are three that are discussed, kind of the most in the paper. Um, so one is the feeling of enjoyment. So they use another paper's model for like a fun scale. This is just kind of fun in like its rawest sense. So this might involve survey questions like, I'm gonna zoom in a little bit just so that this is easier to for y'all to see. Oh, there's a Elsevier has this thing. Okay, great. Um, Okay. So enjoyment would be if you give positive answers to questions like, when I use social VR platforms, I find it entertaining. I have a good time. It's fun. Very very simple approach of like, how was this for you? Was it a positive or negative experience? So this was one parameter that was significantly greater when using VR for social interaction as opposed to using monitor mouse keyboard. Another one that was significantly boosted was the feeling of relatedness. So if you're feeling more relatedness, you would be more likely to answer yes to questions like, I feel connected with people who care for me, and for whom I care, or I feel close and connected with people who are important to me. So the feeling of meaningful social relationships, of like fondness for one another, things like that. Um, so one very notable thing that was not improved by switching from monitor mouse keyboard to VR in this experiment in this experiment was self-expansion, um, which is here. Okay, here's a much better definition for it than what I was like grasping for. Um, you would be feeling self-expansion if you're more likely to answer yes to questions like, I experience facing situations and challenges other than those in my own life, or I experience what it's like to be someone else. So these are things that have room for improvement. I want to point out, earlier when I was trying to explain self-expansion, I made the mistake of relating it to a feeling of artistic expression. Um, it does map well onto, gaining new skills, because good way to gain new skills is to be in new situations and try out new things and be challenged. Um, but it isn't specifically about artistic fulfillment. Um, there is a separate paper that I'd love to show later, that shows um, some promising results for VR's use as an art tool and the ability to make, for example, art education more exciting and engaging to students, in this case, elementary school students. Um, but self-expansion is something that was not improved. And I wonder if one could come up with certain VR experiences that would let you feel more self-expansion. Because, for example, in the platforms used, VR chat and other programs similar to it, um, I don't imagine that you would have the occasion to be challenged very much, or to experience what it's like to be someone else, unless role play is used a lot,
I
like in certain environments.
I just wanted to add to that. Like when I would
Yeah.
use VR chat, like yeah, like you said, like there's not really an opportunity for you to really be someone else or to be
Mhm.
challenged because everything is just super simple. Um,
Right.
and I remember I would walk past people and like most of the time they would be conversing about something that was going on, like
Mhm.
in their real life. So I think like maybe like a lot of people when they go into these VR platforms, they
Mhm.
typically take whatever's going on outside in real life with them. You know?
Yeah. They bring in whatever's going on in their real lives.
Yeah. But um, yeah. So I think like maybe do you think that 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 could be a bad thing, or do you think that we should have like both an element in VR where you can kind of go like where you, like one part of like maybe like platforms where you
Mhm.
can go in with like whatever like and with what's going on
Mhm.
outside in the outside world, and then platforms that are designed to like distract you or like not distract you but just like to give
Sure.
you the opportunity to immerse yourself and really become someone else.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of like games that specifically challenge the player
Hmm.
right now, and I'm trying to. I feel like there's a so that doesn't normally include like VR chat, where it's not like goal driven.
Hmm.
Um,
Kind of like Dark
I
Souls or
or
Skyrim.
yeah, yeah, some sort of a game where there's threat of defeat.
Hmm.
Um, I think that, or of course there's other ways to have challenge as well, but I think that there's an incredible uh chance for discussion here about how can we make VR experiences that really allow users to feel like they've grown, gained new
Mm-hmm.
skills, been challenged meaningfully, or experienced life through another person's shoes,
Mm-hmm.
fictional or real. Um, because this is a paper that came out earlier this year in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
So these are recent findings. Um, Also, the reason why it's a pilot study that hasn't been followed up on yet. Um, and B, I think that as a medium, VR has a potential to immerse, um, even without being photorealistic. For example, um, there's a famous um, there's a famous game where you just like walk a tightrope between two buildings in VR, and it's not photorealistic. It can run on very simple hardware, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it causes you to feel something that is unlike what you normally feel
Right.
because most people haven't walked on a tightrope from a
Yeah.
high height.
Yeah.
Um, because solely of how well what you see maps to your movements.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is sufficient to immerse.
Yeah.
Um, and how like you can see parts of your own body, like your hands and so on, and maybe your feet, or whatever else inverse kinematics of that game is going to put in for you.
Yeah.
Um, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to expand, um, to give people self expansion with new challenges.
Yeah.
For example, this is okay. So my personal experience with VR is still fairly new. I only got an Oculus of my own, um, kind of in August, for like a class that I gave back, and then I bought my own very recently. Um, so I haven't played many games on it, mostly just Beat Saber and Half-Life Alyx. But even from just those two games, um, I feel like, uh, one, Beat Saber has motivated me to exercise in a way that I have never felt motivated before. I barely exercise ever. It's just not a thing that I ever managed to consistently put into my schedule. But because of like how it gamifies it, this isn't even by virtue of the fact that it's VR. This is by virtue of the fact that it's fun.
Yeah.
Like it manages to broaden my, you know it manages to improve my life by giving me like a fun way to exercise and like feel proud of myself for having done that and feel a little bit more energy and also have a little bit more arm strength. Um, and then another example is, this one is specifically by virtue of the fact that it's VR. Um, in Half-Life Alyx, there's this really amazing like, harmony between the story and the gameplay, where you're playing as Alex, who is not exactly combat hardened in the same way that Gordon kind of inexplicably is, even though he's just a researcher at Black Mesa to begin with. Um, you experience firsthand how difficult it is to use a pistol because you have to physically aim it. You need to make sure that it's angled correctly. You need to squeeze one eye shut so that you can see down the sights properly. And you experience how difficult that is. And by playing Half-Life Alyx, I've been gaining what I imagine would be a little bit more facility if I ever were to use a pistol in real life, which I don't enjoy using firearms, so that's not a thing that I would do. But like, even though it's not something I like personally value, it's a skill that I've gained by using it that actually has a direct translation to real life. And I think that there's room for a lot of that because of how, how much you like use your hands in a realistic way in VR, for example. I don't know. What about you?
It's literally I've had the same experience. Those were my main two games: Half Life Alyx and Beat Saber.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, like I would totally agree with you. Like the like this isn't even real. Like I just it kind of it definitely humbled me. You know,
Yeah.
like because it's a video game setting. Sure, it's nothing like in real life, but in a video game setting, I was panicking, having something walk towards me at like 2 miles per hour while I'm trying to
Medium
reload.
speed.
Yeah, 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 exactly. like while I'm trying to reload my pistol, and here I am,
Right.
I'm like fumbling, like I dropped the mag at one point, and then like after I dropped the mag, I'm like I gotta get out of here before this thing catches me.
Mm.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
but like yeah, like and that I think like that's definitely a good metric to go off of, and like not
Mm.
all, like cha- uh, gaining new skills, facing new challenges, definitely. But I think like
Yeah.
VR should also, in a sense, help you escape from whatever's going on.
Mm.
Especially when COVID was at its peak, or like when when people were indoors quarantining, or just like staying at home, just because like this was when everyone was super worried about COVID. Now it's like
Mm.
kind of like chilled out, but wrongfully or rightfully so.
Yeah.
I have no idea. But yeah, so this would have been something that was like if you don't want to think about COVID, like
Mm.
while you're talking with like while you're interacting with people in VR. This is
Right.
something you don't want to think about the fact that you've been at home for the last, I don't
Yeah.
know, like last month, not able to really go anywhere. Um,
Mhm.
so and so I think like there's definitely value in platforms or games that kind of like help you forget. And I kind of
Mhm.
like I would definitely relate it to my experiences, and I'd relate it to me training martial arts. I'm big into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and
Nice.
one of the one of the reasons why I love Jiu Jitsu is not just the physical aspect, but it's also like a very not distracting, I would say, but it helps me deal with whatever is going on outside, because like
Mm.
I might come into practice having something like weighing heavy on my mind, and
Mm.
while I'm training, you don't really have time to think about that stuff. If you think about it, you're getting choked out.
Yeah.
So, uh, you don't have time to deal with it, so you completely forget about it for that 1 hour, hour and a half that you're training, and then
Yeah.
after what it does is it gives you a break, and then when you're done, it helps you kind of like look at it from with a refreshed mind, and
Mm.
helps you kind of like implement like a strategy to help deal with whatever's going on. So I definitely
Yeah.
think that like VR has the potential to help people do that.
Mm. I agree. I think that you I think that one particular area where it can excel uh is creating challenge through fear,
Hmm.
because you mentioned earlier about how you were fighting, I assume, a head crab zombie that was like shuffling toward you very
Yeah,
very slowly.
yeah.
And the fact that even though it wasn't a formidable enemy, it's like a basic grunt. um it was it was challenging. And this game isn't necessarily a horror game, it's just a first person action adventure game.
Hmm.
um like fighting headcrab zombies in Half-Life 2, at least for me, wasn't scary, except for Ravenholm, which is specifically designed to be a horror level. um but when you are physically present and you have to do a lot more things yourself, like aiming and reloading, so that the challenge is increased, all of a sudden it becomes extremely tense. um and speaking personally, I look to horror experiences, movies, games, as a way to make me feel like energized and ready to face a new challenge, because they give eventually the rush of surmounting a threat or challenge that up till that point seemed impossible, seemed like it was imminently going to destroy you.
Hmm.
Um, that's something that makes me feel like I've really faced a challenge that's outside of my life, and that by surmounting that challenge, I now feel energized to go and face something difficult in my life. And this is something that, still speaking anecdotally, has worked for me time and time again. Like this is
Yeah,
a like horror is a go-to for me when I need that. But yeah. Um, you think we have time for another paper?
I think we do.
Cool. Um, there there are two different papers that I guess three different that we could go to. I briefly mentioned a paper that explores um, the use of VR as a tool in an elementary school art class. But I think it might be more interesting to go into what you have. I don't know. What would you like?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could save
Sure.
I think education in VR is that could be like its own topic in itself. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so if you don't mind, maybe we could save it for next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I honestly, I really like these kind of talks where we're just going over some research. I think it's super useful. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think
and it's exciting to see what's gonna happen before it hits market
yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah, for sure. So yeah, so let me share my
I've got it right here
screen.
if you want it, or yeah, you can screen share if you
Yeah,
want.
I can.
I'll stop mine.
So what we're gonna go over next is a paper by Dr. Hao Li. It's the name of the paper is it's AI synthesis from avatar to 3D scenes. That's not the name of the actual paper, but it's like AI. He works on AI synthesis from avatars, where produces um, he produces 3D figures and avatars of users through just an input image. And it's just a 2D input image, and he's able to generate a robust and very realistic interpretation of someone via an avatar. And I'm going to show you what it looks like.
Pretty much it, right? So you improve this, and then you have this really robust way of digitizing the avatar. Now, instead of showing a video, I'm going to show a live demo of that. And let me switch my gears and go to
I'm
the
looking at
other
the
screen.
PDF right now.
Right. So,
And wow, yeah,
see,
these
let me
models are
think
really
I'm
high
logged in.
fidelity.
Yeah. And what's cool is
And
that we'll see it in a second, but they're robust to
here,
any
let me
landscape.
do this first.
You
I'm gonna
you'll
take
have
our
different
host
kinds of
today.
lighting, and
Maybe
like
I'll take that photo here.
the lighting will render
This is like the liquid
as
photo.
it looks really realistic.
See them. So this is a good photo because it has very bad.
Do you want me to
Well,
screen
it's a
share?
beautiful picture,
What's
but
it?
it's very bad
Um,
for in
I
terms
I
of
don't see a
getting
screen share yet.
normalized.
Would you
Right?
would you like me to screen share?
Oh, whoops! I didn't screen share. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Oh, and I do see that there are some. Okay, so there are some models that also put in hair. That's good.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the input
It's
image.
reddish. It has some shadows, and I can try it with you guys later on the webcam as well. So now I downloaded this. I'm going to share my
And now
app.
using that input image, it's tracking this person's head. Is that right?
So it uses. I'll go over the model architecture in a second, but it uses a couple of different neural networks to take an input image and then
Can you guys see this?
create like a 3D representation of that
Okay.
person.
Let's take Peter, and let's see.
Yeah,
how it
it's
looks.
a big machine
So,
learning pipeline.
After 1 second, it's actually already
super
in
neat.
So it already happened. I'm not showing this. I should be probably doing something to show the progress. But this is now taking a little bit, right? So it takes like maybe 30, 40, 50 seconds, I don't know. Depends a little bit like how many people are using it. But during that time, what it's doing is that it's refining, right?
Come on, video, show us the model.
The algorithm,
Oh, and he's doing this in Unity.
model using differentiable rendering.
So that would make it
And,
pretty easy to integrate into games then.
Yeah,
It's already in engine.
Yep.
That's super.
Because well, like one thing also is it's doing this on the fly, so that's why
Yeah.
it takes up to a minute.
So okay, so right now we're seeing it train.
So-
Whoa!
Yeah.
And right, so the body, so the face here
Oh
is
my
so this is a
gosh.
parametric model. One of the things that we did, so we can,
Okay, so it's showing them in like an idle pose right now,
we have like
and
it's
they're
actually
not
doing
yet like
really interesting
following.
stuff. It's getting details on eyebrow.
Like
It actually
moving,
doesn't
you
see
mean?
it, but it's generated.
Yeah, so it's like
You can
there's
see
an
some
idle
of the
animation,
stubble
but it
here
looks like
on the mouth.
They're not
This
yet
these are things that
following
it's imagining from
his
that image, so it's not actually
head
there.
movements.
But it's basically creating this
So
3D
then
model
later is there
from that
a
photo.
does this
And
paper also
what's really
cover like
interesting is that we're
tracking, like having the
also
avatar
doing
move
differentiable
in a way
rendering
that
for
replicates what
eyeballs.
you're doing with your
So
physical
you can
head
see
and
that
face?
So
it's
this
not
is
just a
not the
generic
paper
white space.
itself. So the paper, like in this
Okay.
paper, he just covers taking input images and then rendering them into that 3D representation. But he does
Which is by
have,
itself amazing.
yeah, and if you see here, like it's super robust. Like so the reason why it's like this guy has a pretty neutral facial expression, but
Mm-hmm.
in he has other samples where he has input images of people smiling or like looking sad or crying, I
Mm,
think, and it renders the same neutral expression. And that's just to make it the whole point is to just make it as robust as possible so that when
yeah,
you do render it into like a VR game, then it like people will have
right.
the same neutral expression so that when they smile or anything like that, then it'd be an accurate representation.
Kind of like the facial equivalent of a T pose, where you have this neutral position that you can then easily manipulate.
Yeah, and here's what you were talking about. So
So we talked about how to and
speed this up.
shown back in 2018, where we have an input photo of a person and we can immediately generate dynamic textures of that person based on the performance of
Okay,
another
and so
person, right? The
it's
method
able
is
to
quite simple.
live
You
take a feed of your expression and adjust the model
track
based
the
on it.
facial performance of
Yeah.
an input person, transfer
That's
the
nuts.
animation weights to a model that you have created from that input photo, and basically use that as a condition to an image translation network to generate a facial expression of that person. What we've shown is that you can actually generate plausible facial expressions and also render it from different views.
Yeah.
And
So then the rest of the head is like sort of considered a separate element and it gets attached
Yep.
because you're not going to be moving the rest of your head in order to. Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's
And
so
I'm gonna
cool.
go over the architecture, just
Sure.
so our, everyone can get a sense of like what it's doing. I know it's like I'm just I know we don't usually go over um, like the super technical details, but like this is just such a cool project. I kind
Yeah.
of wanted to share. Uh, stop sharing. Pull out the whiteboard. Um, here we go.
Gotcha.
Can you see the board?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So, um, so the architecture is like I said, it's a bunch of different ML models that takes in an input. So the input is you have an image. Let's say you have an image right here,
Hmm.
right? And you feed it into um, the first neural network, which is called FaceNet.
Hmm.
So what FaceNet does is it takes an input image and then um, it detects the face. If it's an input image of a person, it detects the facial features of that person and it outputs a feature vector, containing all the different, like like maybe like you have like different features of the face or
Hmm.
of certain parts, and then it turns that into a bunch of numbers. Um,
So that's kind of like taking like if you think of like character creation sliders in a video game,
mhm.
like an Elder Scrolls game or like um, Dark Souls or whatever, where you're making a character. It's kind of like taking the face and getting the sliders that would have produced that face.
Yeah, exactly. And what it
Mhm.
does is after it creates that vector, it inputs that vector into what's called a StyleGAN.
Mhm.
And a GAN is essentially it stands for a generative adversarial network. And what it does is its job is to output like the original in the original paper, StyleGANs are used to create like faces of people that don't exist. So
Mhm.
you train it to where it's outputting all these images, and they're supposed to be really high quality images of people that aren't real. But it's just like been trained on a bunch of images of people that are real, so that it could output those other images. And that's like GANs is essentially what's used to create deep fakes. But
Yeah.
here it's used to create two outputs. You have a positional map, and then you have a texture map. So the texture map is basically, like the shade of their skin tone at various places, and the position map is, like the coordinates of those places where you have like that certain shade of their skin.
Yeah.
And this is the part. This part of the model is the generation part, where you're generating and these two are used to create the 3D model. It's definitely but before it does this well, it has to be trained first. So there's a phase 2, which is the refinement phase. Oh, excuse my terrible handwriting. So for
It's not easy writing with a mouse or trackpad.
it is not. So in machine learning, right, you train the model by comparing the output to the ground truth, and then you take the difference or using whatever loss function, and then you feed that back into the model so that the model can kind of optimize for parameters that would cause it to make a good prediction. So for this is essentially what this stage is. So in the refinement stage, you're taking the same image, and then you're feeding it into two models. You have a PSP network, and then you have a residual neural network, or ResNet. And then what this PSP network does is that it detects the position of the face. So if this is the image, right, and then this square is the face, then it detects that face, because that's what we're gonna map. Well, that's what we're gonna use to measure the loss. The face between what the model generates and then the face of the actual input image. And then you have your ResNet, which calculates the face pose. So what this does is it allows us to put the output image from here right on top of where it detects the face.
Gotcha.
So you're combining all four of these into, and then this is how you're taking the loss. So let's say this is the output. This is the output that the generator creates, and then let's say this is the ground truth, and then so it takes the difference, and then it feeds it back and does back propagation, and then the model uses that so that it's able to optimize for this feature vector right here. And so
to find the slider settings basically that most represent your face.
Yeah, exactly. And then through that refinement process, then once you give it an input, at some point, after training's done, the idea is you feed into it an input image of someone, and it creates the same image that you just saw from that video.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So that's the process for creating the initial model. Not for tracking it, but for creating the model in the first place. That process that takes roughly a minute to do.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And that paper, like you said before, that alone is an achievement in itself, but Dr. Lee is also working on some other cool stuff that I wanted to share before we skedaddle. Here we go. So this is taking kind of the same concept, but applying it to the entire
focusing on how do we make
entire person.
virtual humans in the space of entertainment and communication more realistic, so that they don't have the typical
my
problem that you
gosh.
have in video games. So what we're doing here is we're trying to use this hybrid approach.
And there's a lot of pose tracking
Of you have CG
algorithms out there
characters,
already.
but for their faces,
Just like
we
how
want
there's
to
a lot
have
of
very
face tracking
realistic
algorithms out there
faces.
already. So once you have
And,
this, assuming that the underlying skeleton is understood,
the new methods that we have,
like of the model,
introduced
Yeah.
the beginning of this year, in which we won an epic Lega grant for.
Yeah, so it's like
how do we enhance
these renderings are just
the
going to
Unreal
get better
game
and better
with
over
our
time.
pagan solution, right? How
these
can we
things
have
are on
a
the
real-time
these things are
inference of
to an amateur like me
CG
almost
characters. So you can see on the left,
indistinguishable
this is
from like a high quality
CG
face
character
output by like
of
photogrammetry.
Mike Seymour.
Yeah, like
Something that might take
you
the
have
one on the
a
left is already like pretty nice.
real-time neural rendering of his face, where the model has been
and this is created from a
trained
single image,
using
like from one image. The
4 or
3D
5
geometry
minutes
of the face is inferred.
video capture of his face. So we're using this technique in the context of human digitization, right? How can we create virtual content of
So it's like
humans
fake, but on steroids,
for real-time application, for real-time virtual production. We have shown that it's easily possible to just use a performance-driven approach to basically drive the face in real time as well. And we've already integrated that with some of our partners. For example, with one of the top clothing companies in Japan called Zozo. They're part of Yahoo Japan. So we're basically showcasing how we can actually replace fashion models with virtual ones, with virtual influencers. And one of the things that we can show is that now we can actually create very realistic virtual humans and productions of those at scale, right? So this is something that within a few days we can generate, which previously, if you wanted to get to the
and is that able to be rendered in real time?
Weeks, if not months.
I think
I've been showing various forms of.
I think it took a couple of. I think he said it took a couple of days to render that.
The other forms that was
at that level of
motivated in the beginning of this.
But you could have a scaled down version of this where if you cut away enough detail, you can get it to be real time. Presumably.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool. Not the generation, of course, but just the tracking.
Yeah.
Like for example, if you just like rasterize the video rather than like ray trace it, and if you like simplify the hair, and do some other things here and there, you can. That's really cool. I'd love to see how that what that kind of technology would look like when adapted for like real-time interaction. Like if brought into something like a VR space, like VR chat or similar.
Do you have a couple more minutes?
Sure. just a few. I can probably only go till 1:05. But...
Okay. So, literally, that's the next part of the video.
Oh my god. Okay.
And one of the things that's
all right
is obvious in the space is why can't we just?
I would love to see that part of the video. That's like the part that I feel like would be really useful to end users.
Yeah.
Well, that being said, you need to have really maybe you wouldn't. Okay, let's see.
I keep forgetting to share my screen. I was sitting there looking at the video for like a whole minute, just like this is cool.
It's obvious.
No, it's just me and my
in your defense, Google Meet does not give you very clear cues that you're sharing.
Parametric model of an avatar, and put that inside a virtual environment for any interactive application. Well, the advantage is that you can relight it and you can.
Any chance you can turn on?
But there are times
captions
where you do not necessarily need that. Maybe you just want to capture something as it is, just like you're using a video camera, but just in 3D. So Microsoft was also showing this really interesting demo, right? So where they do have an interactive space where people are wearing HoloLens again and seeing each other. But one of the things you can see is that anything that looks really real here are real-time volumetric captures of the people that are then inserted inside this virtual environment. So they have shown a couple of years ago with their holoportation system that if you had the equipment, basically multiple real-time depth sensors that are placed around the person inside a capture environment, you can digitize the entire person and fuse the model in real time and potentially use that as a virtual teleportation system. Other companies like EverCoast are also exploring this, so they're building these low-cost capture environments. But still, you still have the issue that it's not very practical. You do need multiple cameras put around the person, and in order to see the person from any possible angle. So this is not practical because
right. So the limitation of volumetric video is that you need a crazy amount of equipment to get it.
Yeah,
and then also it's not robust to things like occlusion.
This kind of environment inside their homes.
Yeah, exactly.
So does that mean we can never have?
If someone
does it mean that it's unrealistic to have volumetric teleportation in the future?
If someone is like covering a part of...
A couple of years ago, we've been thinking about the
if someone's like covering one hand with the other hand such that no camera can see it, then you can't see what the covered hand is doing.
I did not see any depth sensor or volumetric cameras around her. Although I didn't even see a single camera.
And I doubt
either,
this new
but
method
I think
would be
it's probably
robust to occlusion because it's just a single viewpoint.
If we assume that consumers will have a single camera in front of us, because this is
to reduce the costs is a huge deal.
Yeah.
Everyone is,
which is, I assume, where this is going.
Yep. The idea is you just need one camera.
So a couple of years ago, we started working.
Which is, I mean, we literally walk around with cameras.
Waseda, University on.
And it's pretty standard to have a webcam like in front of you.
How can we digitize an entire 3D person from a single photo? So we introduced this method called PIFU, which stands for Pixel Aligned Implicit Functions. It's a representation that allows us to digitize an entire 3D human with clothing and texture from a single photo, right? So you take a photo, segment the background out, and then use a deep neural network that has the ability to generate a 3D model. So one of the insights here is that, first of all, I mean, you could use a box.
Sure.
But it's just some augmentation. Is that from actually very few training data? I think it was just in the scale.
I'm very excited to see how the real-time models look.
With some
like how much,
of data,
how much photorealism
based on an input photo, we can actually generate
preserved
this 3D model of the entire person. So the network
when you cut down the time to calculate from several days
so these
to
were
like
our first results.
Yeah.
Right? So you can see that
it's definitely not.
It's not bad, right? So even with people holding an
I can
accessory,
imagine, but like
it kind of looks like
see.
legs.
So are these the output
it's
models?
doing something.
Yep.
The initial
these are all
work
the
took.
Wait, these are the ones that can get rendered like
via image.
3D
in
model, and one
at
of the
like 60
bottlenecks
hertz or
in
30
here
hertz
is
or like
basically
whatever
you have to sample
whatever
the
frame
entire
rate
space,
they're
the
using,
entire volume,
like sub-second
because you're
render time.
using a implicit surface representation.
I don't think he goes
Now,
into
this is a
that.
problem for real-time volumetric teleportation.
I'd have to
because
watch
it's
the
not
video
real-time.
again.
So one of the things that we've shown later on,
But these are
it's,
simplified
this
models
method that
then.
we have presented at ECCD last year, and also at SIGGRAPH Real-Time Life, where we won the Best in Show award, is this method that makes this whole thing real-time, right? And there are a couple of tricks here. One is a lossless method that is based on a octree representation, which obviously reduces the amount of sampling that is required. And the other one is a heavy engineering of different scheduling methods, so that we can.
And that's
use
really cool that
CPUs
that it can also handle
do this
objects being held,
so what
even
we've shown is that
deformable
it's
objects like
to do
clothes.
this in real time.
Yeah.
Using very expensive GPUs. So I think we used the GB100 for that. But
very robust.
What's really impressive about this
Which
method
makes
is
it better
that
at
the only
modeling
input
the
is
clothes
just
that are
a
on your
Logitech
body,
webcam.
even if they're
It's not
loose
even a
fitting, like
depth
those
sensor.
like pajamas.
And we put it in the room, and any room.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that one. That one's insane.
Yeah, no, I figured you'd like that one.
All right. Unfortunately, though, I'm gonna have to leave in just a minute.
Oh yeah, no, we're pretty much done. Anyways.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching. Hope you had a fun time looking at some of these papers. Most of them very recent. I think all very recent, except for the 2015 SIGGRAPH paper that put forward an earlier version of redirected walking. Hope you had fun. I definitely love to do more episodes like of this kind in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. But yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone. As always, smash that follow button, and we'll see you next time. I'm never gonna
All
stop
right.
saying that.
See you next time. It will slowly kill me.